Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. For today's video, I feel like talking about something a little bit more serious and a little bit more personal. Today I'm going to be talking about my experience as a young kid taking the medication known as Ritalin. Just to give y'all a little bit of backstory, if you don't know what Ritalin is, it basically is a medication that gained FDA approval sometime in the early 60s for the treatment of ADHD in children, or commonly known as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and today still remains as the most commonly used medication for that disorder. It also can be used on some people to treat narcolepsy, but for the most part it's usually meant to help treat ADHD, particularly in children. And before I continue, I really need to take the time to make a very important statement. I am very much aware that a lot of people have very passionate feelings about this topic, mainly concerning the treatment of ADHD, and that a lot of people feel like it's overly diagnosed in kids and specifically. And that when it comes to medication, many people feel like medications such as Ritalin and Adderall can do a lot of damage in kids over the long term, especially if something like ADHD is overly diagnosed. A lot of people do have that opinion, and all I'm trying to really come from is basically my personal experience taking Ritalin as a kid. I don't have a particular stance on that issue whatsoever. This is just me giving my personal experience, and once I give it, feel free to take that knowledge and do whatever you wish with it. So to begin with, I'm going to start talking about my childhood, and then obviously it's going to lead into when I started taking Ritalin. It's tough to remember all that I went through as a kid, but I do remember that I was extremely imaginative, at least for what adults tell me now that I'm an adult. Many of my teachers through pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, and first and second grade thought I was really intelligent, thought I was really smart, thought I was very well spoken. I was one of those younger kids that took both pre-kindergarten and kindergarten as a kid, and in a sense, pre-kindergarten, especially for the small town that I grew up in, was basically, for the most part, a very over-glorified daycare center. And I'm sure I shared a lot of common traits with other kids at the time, and how a lot of younger kids are in general, in that I was easily distracted, I was easily amused, I could easily break down into common tantrums just like every other young kid has, especially if they act up as younger kids and then the adults have to punish them and stuff like that. So for when it comes to my use of Ritalin, I in particular probably used it for a particularly long time, probably a little bit longer than I probably should have. I basically started taking Ritalin when I was 4 years old and was taking it all the way up to 6th grade. In hindsight, it probably should have stopped by 4th or 5th grade if you want me to be completely honest, but from what I remember, the justification for me using Ritalin was very strong, especially in my early childhood. I do for sure remember doing certain bad things, even for a kid at my age. I was hitting other kids, I was hitting adults, I was causing destruction, mainly breaking things, especially if I was angry. I was talking back to adults, and of course I know that sounds very common, but essentially what I was doing is I was gathering words and stuff that I had heard from TV and movies, and I knew that they were insults, I knew that they were bad words to use, but I would use them very nonchalantly, especially on adults and other kids if they really pissed me off at the time. That, coupled with doing things like harming other kids, harming younger kids, harming girls, and harming adults, and you could see how that was kind of a bad combination to have, especially as a kid. When it came to doing studies and when it came to just doing regular schoolwork, I never ever really understood what I was needing to do. I was never able to focus and understand the magnitude of the importance of what my assignments were. Now, I completely understand that as a kid, no one really has a comprehension of the bigger picture when it comes to doing these assignments, but I didn't have a comprehension of like grades, or it didn't really strike me as a kid that doing these assignments like on paper and or test were important. You know, I thought it was just kind of like a game. I thought it was like a little puzzle to solve, and there was no real purpose in doing it. I didn't realize that I needed to do so good with these test grades and all that stuff to be able to move on to the next grade and all that stuff. And I do remember they had to do alternative forms of helping me complete stuff. I remember being taken into a room all by myself with another teacher, and all they were doing was just reading me questions. And I didn't understand why they were doing that. And I think now as an adult, I realized what they were trying to do was basically not have me read something, but just reading out loud something to me while I was being able to move around the room. And I don't know if they were just testing that as a means to see if I would do better, and that I was doing better if they involved some type of physical activity attached to my assignments. I do also remember my mom inevitably having to take me to like a child psychologist to really see if I needed something like Ritalin. I do remember going to certain office visits, and I do remember them having me take certain tests without my mom being there and stuff like that. And though I may not feel it now as an adult, I felt like there was a slow, gradual process that started to really take off once I was taking the medication. And by first or second grade, I remember kind of just it came to me. It was like a snap thing where I realized that the things I was doing in school had purpose and had meaning, and I needed to do my best at them. It wasn't just some game that I had to fool around with. I had my full comprehension of grades and what it meant to try and do well and have high scoring grades when other kids started showing me theirs. And I remember like I got this one paperback, and apparently it was a bad grade, and some kid just happened to point it out to me. Happened to say this is not a good score, and then it just somehow kind of clicked, me realizing that I had to do well at these assignments in order to be a good student. I felt like it became a lot easier to stay focused, and realizing that I had to do certain things in order to be a good kid, like sit at my desk, be quiet, don't interrupt the teacher, stuff like that. I did still on occasion, up until like 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, was still doing things that got me sent to the principal's office, whether it was insulting other kids or stuff like that. And slowly but surely I stopped hitting other kids. I stopped being violent. I stopped being very hostile and destructive of things and people around me. And because that started to subside around 4th or 5th grade, I feel like going into 6th grade and still taking Ritalin was probably way longer of time for me to take the medication than what was needed. I probably could have stopped a full maybe 2 years before that, if you want to be completely honest. But I did notice a subtle change happening to me over the course of time. Being an adult now, a 28-year-old adult, there were many things that I heard, especially from my parents, concerning the time that I took Ritalin. My mom really felt like it was something I honestly needed, considering what I just told you about my behavior when it came to being violent, as far as like hitting other kids and teachers and stuff like that. It totally makes sense for young kids, especially young boys, to be hyperactive. I totally understand that. Just kind of being loud, running around, yelling, screaming, and all that stuff. That's pretty normal for kids. And I would say if your kid does that, they don't necessarily have ADHD if they're just being rambunctious. You know, if they're just being restless and all that stuff, being loud, screaming, all that stuff, laughing at the dumbest crap, you know, stuff like that. But I was legit like hurting people. I was throwing objects, I was breaking things, I was hurting both kids and young and you know, like pets and animals and stuff like that. And if I got like really upset at an adult, I would sometimes strike out and lash out. I do remember that specifically. When it came to my dad telling me about my experience taking Ritalin, he to this day felt like it was something I didn't really need. He felt like I was a completely natural boy, you know, just being aggressive, as he would say it, that I didn't really need Ritalin. And I think in his mind, especially with how he kind of acts now, he thinks it kind of changed me as a person, and I don't know if that's something he necessarily likes. Considering how I am as a person now, you know, socially, and how I identify as for my personal identity, it's not something he always agrees with, and probably flat out doesn't agree with at all. So when it comes to Ritalin, I felt like he was kind of put off by me taking it, and I think he thinks that it changed me as a person into someone that he didn't really want to see his son become, if that makes any sense. I am not really overly aggressive. I'm not prone to violence at all anymore. And I don't really see this as a fault of Ritalin, specifically, because how could it be? But like, in high school particularly, I focused more on like academics, and stuff like that. I did slowly start to wane off sports. I still did a couple of sports. The biggest two I stuck out with were like tennis and track and field, but I did not do like the mainstream ones like football, basketball, or baseball. I kind of just lost interest. But specifically when it came to football, I didn't have a desire really to just try to really tackle anyone, if that makes any sense. It's not that in the sense that I wasn't afraid of necessarily being hurt. I was kind of not wanting to necessarily kind of hurt other people. And when I was kept always telling, like, from like, especially from my dad, is like, you have to go take that guy's head off. And I'm like, well, to me, it felt like it's just a game. Why do we have to take it so seriously? So in that sense, and I explained that because I felt like at least to him, that it kind of turned me off from being an aggressive person in that manner, if that makes any sense. However, today as an adult, many people would say I'm very extroverted. I do have my introverted moments. Like anyone, I want to stay home and do stuff and just kind of just chill out. But I still like being around people. Many people think I can be the life of the party in a lot of sense. I can be humorous and all that stuff. And I still have those same qualities that I talked about in the beginning of the video, where a lot of people do think I'm intelligent and stuff like that. I don't necessarily consider myself that smart of a person, but people still think I'm like well-spoken and stuff like that. So when it comes to those virtues that I always had as a kid, those always stayed with me. And do I really want to say now that as an adult that taking Ritalin killed the more aggressive side of me? I don't know. I don't really know if I really can complain if it did or not. I have to feel like that, what happened to me having taken Ritalin, regardless if it resulted in anything as changing me as an adult, if that was necessarily a bad thing or is something I need to lament upon, if that makes any sense. Things happen for a reason. I don't mean to be very philosophical about that, but I felt like, well, the way my adulthood has gone on now, I would not have had it any other way. I've had a lot of fun and a lot of good memories and stuff being an adult, regardless of the fact that I was basically on a mild form of cocaine, if you want me to be completely honest. Some people consider it's almost in the same, Ritalin is almost like a mild form of cocaine. And I was on it for, over 10 years. Or I'm sorry, maybe not 10 years, but quite a long time. From 4 years old all the way up until 6th grade. A considerable amount of time. And did it change me as an adult? Maybe. But I don't stop to really think about it. It doesn't ever really cross my mind at all. And again, I felt like the direction my life took, especially with the choices I made in high school and the organizations and all the stuff that I chose to be a part of in high school, I felt like did me more of a service in the long run, considering how my job and my lifestyle and all that other stuff led to. In hindsight, when I really do stop to think about it, I probably indeed was one of the actual legit cases for someone who needed Ritalin as a kid. But I feel like when it comes to just general children, especially boys in particular, just being kind of rambunctious and hyper and loud and stuff like that, as long as they're not causing harm to anyone and as long as they are able to fully realize the consequences of their actions, I would say those kids don't necessarily need medication for ADHD like I did. I completely acknowledge that being a parent is hard and that my mom probably really struggled with the decision to decide to give me Ritalin as a medication. But this was obviously the early 90s, and I'm sure the way people felt about Ritalin at the time is not necessarily the exact same as how people feel about it now. And that there's a large growing group of people who feel like, that it's overdiagnosed. So again, that, to the best of my recollection, is the experience I had when taking Ritalin and how it may have translated into my adult life and how I interact with others and how I deal with the comes and goings of a typical things that happen in an average everyday life for a person. I don't really ever stop to think about it. I don't really ever stop to think about how things could have been. This is all I know. This is what I'm used to, and I'm happy with how things turned out. And I feel like I don't have a place to really give advice to parents, considering that I'm not a parent, but I feel like it's incumbent upon every single parent out there who maybe run into this problem to obviously do their research, to talk to professionals who don't have a real biased opinion, and just to be informed of all the information, and just to acknowledge that kids sometimes just need to be kids, and that you don't need to jump the gun when it comes to being worried if your child may have something or doesn't have something. Thank you all for listening. I'll talk to you soon.